So in today's video, we're going to talk about the largest aquascape that I've ever done. What's going on, everybody? Justin from H2OPlants.com, and today we're actually taking a look at the largest tank that I've ever had the chance to aquascape. Now, why is this important? Well, for one, I've had this 55-gallon tank that I've had for a very long time, pretty much since I started keeping planted tanks. And it just never really works for aquascaping. It's not that great of a tank just from the dimensions. It's very tall and very short front to back, so you don't have a whole lot of room to do stuff with. So it's a very difficult tank to really arrange rocks and driftwood and plants to really create something that's really nice looking. Now, it's gone through many iterations ever since the very beginning planting of it to what it was recently, and it looked okay, it was decent, but it's not what I wanted. It just overall just wasn't the best thing for me. So when we bought this house and when we started laying out the fish room, I kind of figured out where everything's gonna go and how that tank was gonna fit into this, and it just really didn't, because I didn't like it anymore. So for the last year, I've been not only trying to come up with the funds but also the time to do this whole task, because what's involved is moving all the fish and shrimp and all the plants and everything that I want to keep that's in the 55-gallon to the new tank, but also kind of rescaping it, and that can be very kind of tedious. So what was kind of good just to start off with is the 55-gallon is the same dimensions as far as tall and width that the 75 is, but the 75 is much more deeper front to back. So all my existing equipment that's on the 55 can be used for the 75-gallon, the light, the filter, and the heater. There's not a huge size difference between the two other than that. But the depth is really what I wanted, something more that's farther front to back, so it allows me to really pile in the plants, do some nice hardscape, and make it look really cool. So what was the first step? Well, the first step was kind of figuring out what substrate I wanted to use. I could use the existing stuff that's in the 55, which was Eco-Complete mixed with Black Diamond Blasting Sand. Of course, I would have to have gotten more because it wouldn't be enough to fill up the 75, being that it has like an extra 8 inches or so front to back, so I would have needed several more bags of each of those. So I decided to go with Contra Soil, which is what we have on hand and what we used in most of the tanks around me. I will link it down below if you want to pick up a bag for yourself. But it's essentially aqua soil. It's all very similar stuff, and it's high in clay and high in organic matter, so it's really good for plant growth. So we wound up using, I believe, 3 or 4 bags. Jake actually helped me out with this. We poured a bunch of bags in it just because we had a bunch that we had ordered to set up this room behind me, so we wound up using most of what we had left over in this build. So after we laid down the substrate, we then did the hardscape, because I knew I wanted to use some sort of stone and I wanted to do a nice stone face. I didn't want to use really any wood or minimal wood if I was going to use any to begin with. So I decided to start with the stone and lay out the stone. So now here's something that we really have to take into consideration with the tank is the aqua soil once we lay it down, because what aqua soil does is it leaches ammonia over about a couple weeks. So anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, maybe even slightly longer, it'll leach ammonia out, and that can cause a buildup of ammonia, which is toxic to fish and livestock. So we couldn't add in fish or shrimp right away. We could add in plants if we wanted to, but what I wanted to let it do is start allowing the ammonia to kind of excrete from the substrate, build up, and for the filter to start a biological bacteria colony, so that way it starts pulling out that ammonia and turning it into nitrates. So I let the tank sit for about 2.5 weeks, and we just recently planted it this weekend. Mainly because I was waiting for new plants to come in, because it's going to be using plants that I don't really have that much of, and I needed a lot of plants to really fill this bad boy up. Now you see a lot of the existing plants in the 55 were coming over. A couple of things to note with the plants that we were taking from the 55 into the 75. So one, a lot of the stems that we had in there that we wanted to bring over were affected with a type of algae called Spirogyra algae. Now this algae is very resilient to most types of treatments. I haven't noticed that Excel really impacts it all that much, and there really isn't anything that eats it. Keep in mind, I do have 2 reticulated flying foxes, which are known to eat types of hair algae, and I have a mono shrimp in here as well, along with Nerite snails. So all 3 of those typically eat most hair algae, and none of them have touched it. So it's been able to really spread and kind of take over underneath all the plants, and sometimes it comes up and you can see it. So what I did is I went through each stem and each plant individually that I was putting into the tank to try and remove as much of it as I possibly can. And I do know that there's no way that I got it all. Of course, there will be some that's gonna come in the future, and I'll just have to deal with it then. But really the only way to get rid of it is manual removal, and you just have to stay on top of it. Every time this algae appears, you just have to remove it as best you can, or at least from my experience with it so far. So a lot of the stems, a lot of the rotellas, and a couple of the other stems we're bringing over, but I only used maybe about 1/4 of what I actually pulled out the tank. I didn't want to go through every single plant and have to look for this algae. So I literally just took tops, cut those off, looked at those real quick, and I tossed the rest. The rest were garbage because there was no way that I was gonna sell them or give them to anybody else infected with this diseased algae that I can't seem to get rid of. Now, the other stem plant that I have in the tank that I'm actually not going to be bringing over is Hygrophila polysperma sunset. It's typically an invasive plant here in the United States. You can't really ship it across borders. Now, it's a very beautiful plant. It's actually one of my favorite stem plants just because of its beauty, but it's really too big for this type of tank setup that I'm trying to do here. You see, I'm using a lot of smaller, fine-leaved plants for the most part, and this plant just gets too big too quickly and is gonna outshadow everything else, so it really can't be put in the 75. I do plan on taking it out of the 55 and putting it in the goldfish tank when I'm ready to break down the 55 completely. Next up, there's a lot of bucephalandrids and anubis and all these rare kind of rhizome plants that I've been collecting, and pretty much they all go in the 55 because that's my personal collection of plants, and those are all coming out and moving over. But there's one plant that I'm not taking, and that's going to be the bulbitis. I have a giant clump of bulbitis in there that is just really massive. It's probably one of the largest ones I've ever seen in person, and I'm not going to be bringing it over to the 75 because it's just too big and it's not gonna fit with the scape. So that's also gonna go in my goldfish tank as well because they should be able to leave it alone and it should be able to continue to grow. It's a very slow grower, so that's why I actually don't want to get rid of it, because getting a clump of bulbitis that big is very rare, and if you are lucky enough to come across it, it's going to be very expensive. So the planting process actually went throughout about 2 or 3 days because I had plants that I was bringing in from other people, other hobbyists, because I didn't have enough of the plants that I wanted to really fill up this aquarium quickly. Or I was actually missing some of the ones that I really wanted to use in this. So let's kind of go through what we did. On the first day that we planted a lot of the stems and stuff that was left over from the 55 that I was bringing over. We also planted a giant bunch of Cenobalim. I forget the exact pronunciation of the name, but it's a rare stem plant that likes softer water, and it's a really beautiful, just green type plant that I just got a ton of stems from a fellow hobbyist that was looking to get rid of them. So I put those in there and they look great. On the second day, I got a ton of plants in from some other hobbyists, and we wound up going to town. Tons of different rotalas, ludwigias, and stuff like that. This is super rare stuff. I also took a bunch of plants from my 55, like the Downoy and the Boost, and I started putting those in there as well, along with some of the rare Anubis and the Crypt Flamingos that we got as well. And I also introduced some new plants via tissue cultures, and we'll see how those do over time, but I'm very optimistic because they looked really nice when I took them out of the packaging, so they should do really well. So now after just a couple of days, the tank is looking pretty dang good, I have to say, but it's not over yet. This is just the very start of it, and I did want to kind of hit on some notes here. So one, when you plant a tank for the first time, it's best to plant heavy. As many plants as you possibly can afford to put in there, do so. The more plants you have, the quicker it'll fill in, the less algae you'll get, and the overall kind of aesthetic of the tank will look better. Now, this does have a couple months before it fully fills in, but I did want to showcase the very beginning process of it because that is kind of where everybody starts. You're going to plant your tank, and it's gonna have to grow in. It's not gonna be an overnight success. It does take time, and this is just one of those, especially because the plants in this case are rare plants. They cost a lot of money, so it's not one of those that I could just buy a ton of one plant and put it in there and it'd be filled in completely. So we're gonna have to give it some time, and we will do monthly updates on this tank over the course of its life until, I don't know, until we decide to redo the tank at some point. But I am very happy with it. We'll have to see how it fills in. I'll have to see if I get any more of that algae, but who knows what'll happen. So after I planted everything and got everything set up, we did move the light from the 55 over, and I put the fluorescent tube that was on top of this tank originally onto the 55, just because there is some plants left in there. There's also the livestock left in the 55. I haven't moved that yet. We're still waiting for that ammonia to kind of burn up out of the substrate, and we did switch over the existing filter that was in the 55, so now that should really help to kind of get the cycle really going and started. Now, you may be saying, oh, well, you have the filter, it's already cycled, and that should be enough. But because we use so much aqua soil, it's not going to be enough. There's going to be an ammonia buildup, and I don't want to risk my fish or my shrimp because I really do like them, and I don't want to put them in a situation where either A, I have to do a ton of water changes every day, or B, I wind up killing them. So we're going to give it probably about another 2 weeks or so, and then we're going to move them over, and after that, everything should be set up. The cycle should have been well on its way, and it should be able to sustain itself, as well as the plants growing are going to help also combat that ammonia and nitrate and nitrogen buildup and all that. But that's really it, guys. If you have any questions or comments about the tank, leave it in the comments below, and we'll actually touch on some of those in the next update video. If you have any questions as far as plants or anything like that I used, let me know, and we'll kind of touch on that in a future video. It's just too much to name in this one video, and I didn't want to make this a super long video. As always, hit that like button, and if you want to help support making these videos happen, you can head on over to our website, h2oplants.com, and pick up plants of your own. And if you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, you can click that round button there. If you want to check out our last video on Wabikusa balls, which some people seem to really love, you can click right down here. And if you want to check out our 1.5 year update on our fish room, you can click right here. And we'll see you guys on the next one.